10-osios viešojo valdymo pokyčių konferencijos Sekcija A, kuri yra skirta
Welcome to the second panel of the conference that is aimed at public sector modernization, sustainable solutions and good practices. We have quite a few keynote speakers. Unfortunately, due to the military situation and the shelling of the cities in Ukraine, majority of the panelists won't be able to join us. But despite that complex situation and challenging situation, we are going to have three presentations online. We have one professor from Poland, from Metu University in Torun. This is Professor Robert Gawlowski, and we have him here in person. Let me start. Let me start this panel with our very good friend, Natalia Gavkalova, who made her presentation together with Julia Lola. They are from Simon Kuznets Kharkiv National University of Economics in Ukraine. And we will start from her presentation. We hope that Natalia Gavkalova will join us on the Zoom platform. So, Madam Gavkalova, the floor is yours.
Tai čia jau aš turėčiau čia. Taip, tai tam tikri pakeitimai dėja.
Again, new changes in the agenda. We see it is very difficult for the speaker to join us online. Professor Gavkalov has not joined us online, and therefore she cannot begin our panel. So then I would suggest we're giving the floor to Professor Robert Gawlowski from the WSB Metu University in Torun, Poland, to present his presentation.
Please, Professor.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your invitation. Very happy that I can present you, those who stay with me on this panel and those who are remotely with us, my preliminary findings for last research about influence on COVID influence on public administration in Poland. One caveat that I'd like to make at the beginning is that I mostly focus on public administration as a structure, as an organizational structure, not on public services. So it's more from administrative science perspective than public policy perspective. So let me begin from some, I think, interesting facts that I think was mentioned in the previous panel. So when I, at the beginning, look at crisis management documents, actually none of them, the likeliness of the outbreak of pandemic was assessed as a high risk. In all of these documents, in many cases, some basic procedures were prepared and ready to use, meaning that from a procedural point of view, everything was in place. And even key players were to work with on local level just in case of pandemic outbreak were identified. So you may think that everything was in place. However, at the end, when we faced the outbreak of COVID-19, everyone was surprised, and their first reaction are really chaotic. So it's tricked me to think, so what went wrong and why, despite the fact that everything was in documents, the reaction was so chaotic. And of course, one of my first initial thought was that, of course, we never challenge on a such scale pandemic threats. In Poland, it was only some more epidemic than pandemic issues, based on animal issues, problems with epidemiology among animals, not as huge threat as pandemics. So, but I would like to check what happened during this time. So the two most important, crucial research question was what has happened in public administration since COVID, and does it have a quick, meaning short or long-term effect? So can we identify these changes and think or assess if it's contribute to the way how public administration is running now or not? So in order to conduct this research, together with my colleagues in team, we sent 110 questionnaires to local and regional governments. And in the second stage, we conducted interviews with permanent secretaries, it's CEOs of local and regional administration, so those who are responsible for public management, not from this political side. And actually, I believe we can double digit and conduct 10 more interviews, because I believe that only in this way we can figure out how pandemic exerted influence on the way how public administration in Poland is running. So when it comes to this first stage, this qualitative research, we divide our questionnaires on 3 parts: knowledge and skills, then administrative changes, and the third was cooperation with external partners. So jumping to the first part of this research, knowledge and skills on the local civil servants, I pick and choose, I think, 3, only a few of, I think, the most distinctive results that have shown the short and I believe also a long-term effect on public administration in Poland on local level. So we ask CEOs, our permanent secretaries, what kind of skills they need more during the pandemic time. And I think that digital competence, it's quite obvious, and it was expected that this kind of skills would be chosen. However, the most important thing is that this competences is not only the competences in terms of civil servants, but citizens as well. I mean that during this time they find out that a lot of new citizens submit their e-signature or establish their account on e-platform for public administration. So this change has appeared on both sides, not only from civil servants, but also from users of public administration services. The third thing is teamwork. It's important because it shows that one of the main struggle or challenge from public administration in Poland was facing with silo effect. We talked a bit about this in previous panel, but in order to reinvent the way how public administration work, a lot of horizontal teams were created just to bring or create public service from scratch. So it gives a great opportunity to think about public administration not as a sum of units, but change the logic and start from end user perspective and quality of procedure, and then split the work between units. So that brings or it helps to grow awareness about public administration as a team. And the last thing in this slide that I want to mention is communication skills. I think that in Poland, and I believe in Lithuania as well, we have experienced kind of participatory revolution for the last couple of years, meaning that a lot of new tools of public communication and participation is implemented. And of course, in a lot of cases, that's really useful, fruitful, helpful, and name other advantages of using this kind of tools. However, I think it was important in the context of COVID because it allows to bring new channels of communication, new partners to deal with, to reach people in need during pandemic. So those local governments that engage themselves in implementing new consultation and participatory tools before COVID had a great advantage during this time, meaning they could much easier reach vulnerable citizens, groups, and those who are excluded from public services. Important or very interesting outcomes that appear from our survey is that in many cases more than 60% of respondents agreed with the statement that they changed the training programs in public administration. So of course it was their own decision based on previous experiences during COVID time, and you can find some procedural or formal exemplification of changes that have been implemented on local level. So they agree with the statement, meaning so you can expect in long-term perspective that set of skills or set of tools that you need on local administration have evolved. The second part of this questionnaire was devoted to cooperation with external partners. And I think we could all agree that it was really hard to provide public services in the same way during COVID pandemic, so that on local and regional level there was a huge need to find partners from private as well as non-governmental sector to provide these public services. And in both cases, Parliament secretaries agreed that it was important, or very important. What's interesting, there were different ways to establish these contacts. In terms of NGOs, these contacts were established before COVID pandemic, because local governments contracting out some services to NGOs, so they got some contacts and experiences based on previous cooperation. However, when it comes to private sectors, the direction was completely different. So it was private companies that contact with local administration and proposing some tools that might be useful during the pandemic, such as communication tools from marketing companies that said that we've got a huge base of contacts to people living in your city, we knew how social media works, we are happy to share with it. And it's not only in terms of money or earning some income, but as a part of, I would say, social responsibility. They find himself as an important actor who should have supported local administration. So this kind of relations, that's different direction of relations, also appeared during this COVID time. Organizational changes. So how? What is the new way of public administration or local administration? I think it's the answer about new standards of relation with clients. That's something worth underlying. During COVID time, you had to think about everything from the beginning to end. I mean, how to raise or express interest of such service from citizens' perspective, then organize the meeting or the way how this service was provided, and in the end deliver this public service. And in this new process you have to implement new tools like electronic list of interests and different way of communication, find a convenient place to deliver this public service, just to avoid crowds in city halls. So this new standard of relations in many cases have been hugely valued, meaning it's lived longer than COVID, and in many cases local administration based on this kind of relations. So it's very important. Of course, this digitalization issues, like I think many other countries, e-documents, e-signatures, using actually tools that had existed before COVID, was, I think, a quite common outcome of pandemic, because both sides, not only civil servants but also citizens, believe that you don't have to be in person in town hall to deal with your issues. So that's it's easily measurable in a way that number of e-signatures profiles risen, double or tripled in a very short time, and are still in use. So that's probably the most important outcome. And actually, in this part of research, I wouldn't say I was a bit disappointed, but it was hard to find something surprising, something that I would say, I didn't expect this on that. However, the most interesting part of our research was the second step in this research. I mean, interviews with parliament secretaries. As I said, we have succeeded in 10 interviews, and the next are planned in the near future. So I choose some, I think, quite interesting quotations that show direction of change or drivers of change. Respondent 1, for example, I'm ready to change the way of work of City Hall in day 1. Everyone knows how to react. So it shows you that there is a huge institutional memory that was created during COVID time. It's hard to find it in procedures, in official documents, but CEOs, as other leaders in town halls, they are ready for crisis situations. They challenge themselves in difficult times. So that's something maybe that's not such tangible or easy to follow in official documents, but it's really important when it comes to public administration in action. The second point, civil servants are trained and ready to be more efficient. We are ready to do more by less. That's something that it's hard to agree in official question form, but it shows you that these new digital tools create a room of change, of innovation. And of course, no one said that they are willing to make redundant some civil servants, but they are aware that it is possible to be more efficient. And they also add that they are quite certain that during this COVID time, the quality of services didn't decreased. So that was, of course, for their huge satisfaction. The third interesting quotation, we haven't talked about our experience with anyone. So, of course, it tells you that we've got overlapping crises during the last 3 years. And I think we haven't paid enough attention to find a platform to collect this experience and build on that, improve the way how public administration works. So I hope that our findings and recommendation might be a bit in this discussion. And finally, now we haven't changed formal procedures and documents yet. So that's something that supports my previous statement that when we talk about changes in public administration during COVID time, in terms of Poland case, of course, it's really hard to find some lessons learned only based on desk research. It's more about institutional memory. It's more about reinventing organization by some internal way of working. It's more about building awareness of civil servants. It's more about crisis resilience. So that's I think important to focus or pay more attention to this qualitative research if we want to really discover the consequences of COVID crisis. And I'm sure that this migration crisis as well, because there was simply no time to prepare for that. And in Polish case, we didn't have migration policy, we didn't have procedure for situation that we had to face. in last year since the outbreak of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So if we want, as a researcher, try figure out what happened in public administration and public services, we need to pay more attention to qualitative research rather than qualitative desk research or just learning from procedures and formal documents. And that's, I think, all from my side. Thank you.
Dėkojame profesoriui už įdomų pranešimą apie pandemijos metu
for a very interesting presentation on the lessons learned from the pandemic in Poland. Well, perhaps we will have some more questions at a later point, during which we will voice them. In the meantime, I can see that now Professor Gavkalova has already joined us, so we would therefore now like to give the floor to her. So please turn on the sound and please, Professor, start your presentation.
Thank you very much. Dear sirs, dear colleagues, dear friends, first of all, thank you very much for opportunity to take part in your conference. Really, this conference of the Mykolas University, of the Mykolas Romeris University, is unique because of the location. This conference is very impressive. And really, I remember my first visit to the Mykolas Romeris University in 2018, and I was very proud to make my report at the Parliament of Lithuania. Thank you very much for opportunity to take part again. But online is not offline, is not such kind of atmosphere. But it was a set of event started with my first visit. It was COVID-19. Consequences of COVID, and the dangerous, it was a war, and because of this war, I didn't have opportunity to come to the conference during the previous year, and this year it's a pity, but war continue to be in my country, and we should realize all our efforts, But first of all, I would like to to appreciate you, my colleagues, my friends, and our big friends, because only you help and support. Help us, and really we hope that together with your support, together with your expectation, our victory, the victory of Ukraine, will be soon, because all country all over the world support us. So thank you very much for your attitude, for your support, and I would like to conclude my introduction with the previous report. My first report my first report in 2018 was about the process of decentralization. Process of decentralization in Ukraine. These processes started with 2002, 2014, and I made a report about the process of creation united territorial communities. These communities were new units or new communities, and these communities were and are the engine or drivers of economic development of Ukraine. The number of communities in 2018 was near 700. Now the number of united territorial communities in my country near 1,000 and 600 and 500. So the situation with creation, the process of organization of this community, these processes are almost finished. But the war, when the war started, the new problems appeared, and today I would like, first of all, to share the information about the situation with labor migration or with citizen migration, my citizen, the process of migration not only outside of the country, but inside of the country. Because Ukraine is a big country, there are different regions, and some of regions, I'm representative from Kharkiv region, and my region is near the border, and the situation really continue to be very difficult, and some of my citizens, they take part in the process of migration. Some of them left the country, but some of them continue to be inside of the country. But there are the different problems and different processes, the first. And the second, I would like to give the opportunity to understand the problematic situation in our Ukrainian economy, because with the help of open data, I would like to give the evidence that really situation is very difficult, and Ukraine tried to realize all goals, tried to support and tried to protect the businesses, small businesses, big businesses, and really our government under the power of the president of Ukraine, our government realize all goals, and in spite of this effort, the situation continued to be very difficult because of the war. So I would like, if I can share my screen. Could I share my screen or not? I'm so sorry. Thank you. You can see my presentation, decentralization of power and challenges of war in Ukraine. And I would like to start with a little bit statistics. The war in Ukraine caused massive internal and external migration of the population of the border region. According to the data from United Nations Refugee Agency, more than 1 million and almost 400,000 forcibly displaced persons were settled in 2014. But by January 31st of January 2022, as a result of a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, more than 3,600,000 forcibly displaced persons has already been registered in 967 territorial communities inside of Ukraine, according to the International Organization of Migration, inside and outside. According to the various estimations, more than 1,500 companies have applied for the government relocation program, of which 510 have already moved their production west from Bochum region. This year, I would like to attract your attention that this year, according to the forecast, the GDP will decrease by 45%, and revenues from the main local owned sources, land taxes, land rent, etc., will decrease by 38%. As a result, local budgets change their structure, becoming more dependent on the transfers from the central budget. And our United Territorial Communities, the idea of the creation, the idea was to solve the local problems, to solve these problems more effectiveness, and according to the new financial or budgetary policy. So United Territorial Communities operate their own budgets, consolidated budgets, and you can see that because of the situation and because of the war, as a result, the local budget, the budget of United Territorial Communities changed their structure and became more dependent. In some communities, it is difficult to convene meeting of local council due to the absence of deputies, and the relationship between the elected authorities and the military administration, in most cases, high established cooperation is a new reality that needs to be closely monitoring. Starting with this slide, I would like to meet the information about the migration, about the situation in our United Territorial Communities, and with the data that explains the situation with the gross domestic products and with other economic indicators. And I would like to attract your attention that really the war, the influence of the war was very negative, and only because of the effort of the government of country, of the president of Ukraine, only because of their effort, the situation is not good, but more or less stable. You can see, starting with this slide, you can see the information about dynamic of gross domestic product, about dynamic of industrial products. You can see the negative trend or the negative data. For example, the gap, the GDP decreased in Ukrainian hryvnia in billion. The level of increase in the GDP more than 1,400 billion of Ukrainian hryvnia. This slide demonstrates the negative tendencies too, and correlation between the dynamic of direct foreign investment in Ukraine and of gross domestic products in Ukraine. It's minus 37% direct not foreign investment in million USA dollars. And the other slide they demonstrate as dynamic of the state debt of Ukraine and the situation with macroeconomic instability trend in Ukraine. So all of these slides demonstrate us that situation really is very difficult. But I would like to return to the problems with migration, migration inside of Ukraine, between united territorial communities, and I would like to continue about the fact and to start with the consequences of reform of decentralization. Really, since the reform of decentralization, power took place in Ukraine, a number of important decisions had to made by the local host communities or local authorities regarding the reception, accommodation, and provision of all necessary things. One of the first challenges faced by local self-government bodies was the accommodation of people who moved or who changed their location when war started. They were often accommodation in dormitories of local education institutions, sanatoriums, children camps, and educational institutions which were equipped with the necessary convenience for temporary accommodation. Quick decision on the first day in individual territorial communities united territorial communities stopped the search for the solution to the problem at a systematic level, providing people with housing for a long period of time. Currently, in order to further provide forcibly displaced persons with housing, and availability of vacant property is being conducted in some communities, host communities. And the problem of unemployment persons who move to other region of the country also arose against the background of the decline of the country's economy. Internal migration increased the supply of labor resources in the labor market of certain regions. In addition, due to the different structure of the economy, the visiting specialists are often not required in this area. These people need to training, and in addition, employers perceive these people as a mobile category of the population and do not want to hire them. Also, there was a challenge related to the registration of labor relations of displaced people who are also remained employed in enterprises in the place from which they moved. In Ukraine, the institution of suspension of the employment contract was introduced, which is defined as the temporary termination by the employer of providing the employee with a job, and the temporary termination of the employee's performance of the work under the concluded employment contract. The process of mutual adaptation of such kind of people who change their location, who change their house and even regions, establish of communication, exchange of experience, and overcoming of existing stereotypes became a challenge for the host territorial communities related to the internal migration processes. For the integration of forcibly displaced people into the local community and their involvement in active participation in its development, the Council of Forcibly Displaced Persons are created as a consultative and advisory body of the City Council. However, taking into account the positive impact of decentralization on increasing the capacity of local communities, because I remember the question when I shared the information about the situation in process of creation of United Territorial Communities in 2018. I remember some question about the number, about the criteria of effectiveness, about the peculiarities of the process of creation. We can conclude that really the process of decentralization, these processes provide the positive reaction of host territorial communities, and this process helped when it should be the extra management of local migration, of the process of local migration. And the Ukrainian authorities have confirmed their determination to continue the reform of updating the administrative and territorial system, and at the same time eliminate those shortcomings that remained unresolved at the beginning of 2022. Therefore, we are looking for tools for building connection, forming a mechanism for consolidation, the effort of volunteer initiatives and local self-government. The process must be systematic, therefore there are initiatives in Ukraine to adopt program for the perception of volunteering development in territorial communities in the period 2023-2027. The program must include plan of specific measures for the development of volunteering, attracting both the external and internal resources, and extremely sure that partnership and cooperation of public sector, local self-government, and business is vital for the unity of society of Ukraine, for the development of united territorial communities, and for our citizens. And I would like to return really the process of decentralization. These processes these processes demonstrate their important role, and demonstrate that really united territorial communities should be the drivers of the drivers of modern development, and should be the drivers of future development and restoring of the country, and building new society after the war, because the representative of united territorial communities demonstrated their activity not only in the stable life, but when situation changed under the influence of negative military factors, the united territorial communities in Ukraine, the representative of these communities, the volunteers, demonstrate that really communities can be can continue to play a leading role at the process of protection the people, protection my citizen, protection Ukrainian citizens. So I would like to conclude that really the process of decentralization can help our victory, but I would like to return to my introduction, and thank you very much for your help, for your support, because not only the process of decentralization is the consequences or result of all reforms, but only our efforts, efforts of the government on Ukraine under the power of the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the effort and the help and support of our partners of other countries all over the world. The representatives of all countries support us, and really we are very proud that you together with us. And thank you very much to the representative of Nicholas Romero's University. Every time I remember that the first day of the war, I got the first message from my colleagues from this university with words of support and with proposals to come to the Lithuania. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you for your presentation, Natalia. Thank you very much for connecting with us. Dėkojame Natalijai Gavkalovai.
We thank Natalia Gavkalova for her extensive presentation and for telling us about the challenges that Ukraine faces during the war. We wish strength, stamina for her personally and for the country. We hope that she will withstand the Russian aggression. And now, if I may, I'd like to give the floor to Alona Shevtsova from Södertörn University in Sweden. I see that she has joined us online.
Thank you for connecting with us. And you can start if you are ready. Okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, we can see your slides. You can start.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, distinguished organizers, dear participants, I'm very happy to be here today with you at this conference, which I consider to be a very important platform for sharing, for the exchange of information and knowledge, practical tools, best practices that will be undeniable of help to build resilience and to reach sustainability in public sector in times of uncertainty. No matter how we call times of uncertainty, and they are called in different ways in research, times of crisis, anxious times, some scholars even try to measure them, calling deep uncertainty, or even giving a degree to it, calling it higher uncertainty. The only thing that is clear enough to everybody is that, as never before, we need new ways to interact for development that would be cost, time, and resource efficient. Also, we do not have that much time for inventing new models, new theories, new approaches, but it is clear that those methods that are available in our toolkit will not work within those times of uncertainty, or limb uncertainty, as I call in my research, that we are facing now with Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine. That is why my offer and my opinion as of a researcher is that, based on successful practice, we need to build theory for the purposes of disseminating this practice and multiplying it. This is what I did. I developed a stakeholder partnership theory based on autoethnography case study method in Ukraine that is explained by my previous capacity as public servant in Ukraine. And those reform initiatives that I generated and coordinated within the public agency where I worked. And that work also included global work, as I was a steering committee member at one UN working group. So the main, that is why this theory and this model that I am to present today is kind of a new toolkit that Ukraine, together with Sweden, can offer to the whole world. The main cornerstone of this theory is that a stakeholder partnership is, on the one hand, a new efficient mechanism of reforms implementation, and on the other hand, stakeholder partnership is a new efficient form of transnational cooperation. At this slide, you may see the correlation. We all perfectly know that national reforms and transnational reforms do not exist separately. It is a kind of a synergy, coherent activities that exist and inter-influence each another. I'm convinced that transformation anchors, and here you can see, for example, EU or UN, this is just an example, this is not the exhaustive list. As far as I was working for the State Statistics Service, these were the transformation anchors in my activities, for example. That is why you will not see NATO here, but of course, this is not the exhaustive list. So the transformation anchors play the role of formalized inspiration whenever we speak about national reforms. National reforms comes by means of inspiration from transnational reforms. And when national reforms are implemented, as far as it's a national manifestation of transnational reforms, they also influence and contribute to transnational reforms. I will offer an example. For example, UN Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda of Sustainable Development till 2030. In Ukraine, formalized inspiration is depicted, is expressed by means that there is the presidential decree mentioning on sustainable development goals in Ukraine till 2030. It means that the global theme of sustainable development goals were inspired, but in a formal way, because it is reflected in legal texts. International reforms, as far as sustainable development goals, needed, of course, the measurement and the assessment of progress. There was the initiative at regional level to develop the tools and methodologies how to assess progress achieved. And for example, United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific developed such methodology. Ukraine was inspired by this model and decided to test it. Such a progress assessment was implemented at national level, but afterwards, Ukraine went further and offered a subnational assessment that was a pilot and thematic assessment. And thus, it returned to transnational reforms inspiration as country cases of implementation and adding a country ownership. That multi-level engagement of reform initiative was feasible here, and it moved from regional level to national level, from national level to subnational level, and afterwards to thematic level. As far as in times of uncertainty, we are posing many challenges. We cannot build plans for the long run. I'm convinced that it is important to single out the minimum unit. If we perceive a reform as a system, then reform initiative is a minimum unit of this reform system that would have a tangible outcome of co-created value. Why this is especially important in times of uncertainty? Because even if the reform initiative faces the risk of failure, there will be no danger to the whole system of reform. Because in case of one failure of the reform initiative, the system will not collapse. So I offer splitting, finding this minimum unit, and to perceive even reform as a system as the combination, as the number of reform initiatives. And reform initiative cycle, in my understanding, consists of 3 phases: initiation, implementation, and validation. The next slide shows the stakeholders, the stakeholder partnerships, and those stakeholders that are within this partnership. You may see 3 variables, how they are determined: power, urgency, and legitimacy. The classification of these stakeholders were developed in business administration by Mitchell and et al. When they developed theory of identification of stakeholders. So I tested these business administration theory in public administration, but not concerning the organization, but concerning the reform initiative. And of course, certain stakeholders shifted their places. You may see that the core 3 stakeholders are public agency, international actor, and implementer. Public agency is a definitive stakeholder and has all 3 variables in it: power, urgency, and legitimacy, because it has mandate within the reform initiative, because it has all necessary resources to implement it, power, And it is needed for the public agency itself, which is urgent to implement this reform initiative because it's within their mandate and they are responsible for the implementation and modernization of their activities. Implementer, for example, you may see have power and urgency variables because they are hired within this stakeholder partnership to implement stuff, and that's why the urgency of the work is explained by contractual relations concerning the initiative. International actor, dominant stakeholder, has power and legitimacy, and I will describe a little bit later what I mean by international actor, because they have dual function. On the one hand, transnationally, and at the other hand, nationally. Government, as the dormant stakeholder, has power as the main variable. Why? Because public agency is that proficient in their activities and is doing their work perfectly well, so that government doesn't need to intrude. Otherwise, government has the power, of course, to intrude and to stop this reform initiative. Civil society, academia are discretionary stakeholders. They have legitimacy, of course, concerning reform initiative, necessary professional skills and experience. Critics are dangerous stakeholder, and in this case, in case with these stakeholders, it is very important to realize how dangerous they actually are, because these type of stakeholders will always be there. There will always be opponents and people who will criticize. And so different approaches might be used towards dangerous stakeholders. If they are that dangerous, they might be engaged as implementers to move them to decrease the level of the risk that they may pose in such partnership. And of course, users of reform initiative, I mean, they are demanding stakeholders because it is urgent for them to get the outcome of the reform initiative implementation and to get some additional value or benefits that the reform initiative will bring. So stakeholder partnership as a mechanism, this slide, you may see how it looks like. And now we are speaking about the phase of initiation. You may see the main top three stakeholders, which I emphasized in the previous slide: public agency, international actor, and implementer. So the mechanism looks like this: that public agency, inspired by transformation anchors, prepares an initiative and addresses the international actor, who in its turn selects and signs a contract with the implementer. So speaking about public agency, bullet one, the main idea of this theory is that public agency has to do a home assignment. The home assignment consists of 6 sub-stages, that is, analyzing transformation anchors relevant for the public agency in question, defining initiatives, finding tools and models, patterns available at the transnational level to simplify the implementation of reform initiative, selecting potential international actor partner, drawing the matrix of reform initiatives, and initiating negotiations with international actor. This is very important, that public agency takes the lead, very proactive position, and does the home assignment. The role of transformation anchors is inspiration or formal inspiration. On this slide, you can see the example from my empirical background, because reform as the system consists of minimum units, reform initiatives, and afterwards reform initiatives are joined into the themes and form the portfolio. So here you may see the themes that were from my work, from my activities. One theme will be common for all agencies, that is operational. And here, this is everything that concerns smooth effective and efficient operation of public agency. Law, communication strategy, human resources, IT, etc. Then in my case, it was also census and initiative to transit to register-based census, SDGs, of course, and vulnerable people, IDPs, stateless persons, and work in this case at global level. So if we take, for example, the topic of vulnerable people, IDPs, stateless persons, the inspiration of the reform initiative here comes from the global level, as far as the expert group on refugee, IDP, and statelessness statistics, where I represented Ukraine in the steering committee, developed the UN recommendations. So this is the reform initiative. And afterwards, when implementing it at the level of Ukraine, and the working group was set, that was coordinated by the State Statistics Service, and I was coordinating that working group together with International Organization for Migration. And we were working upon the development of the roadmap for the implementation of international recommendations on IDP statistics in Ukraine. So here, the inspiration came from the global level, from this e-Greece, as you may see it. And afterwards, e-Greece was engaged into the work at national level. Such close interaction, and I introduce in my theory a new concept of multi-level engagement, implying, on the one hand, the possibility of reform initiative to move, to transfer from one level to another level. But on the other hand, this is the engagement of actors working at different levels. For example, as in this case, that the global actor, e-Greece, was present in work at the national level. Or, for example, operational level law. The pattern was developed by United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or UNICE, Eurostat, this is statistics service for the European Union, and EFTA, European Free Trade Association. This was the generic law, a pattern developed for Eastern Partnership countries, Central Caucasus, and Central Asia. So this is where the inspiration came from. And afterwards, it was implemented at national level with the support from UNDP. International actors, stage 3. International actors, I imply both approaches, two approaches. On the one hand, they develop a tool, model, pattern, regionally or globally, but at the same time, they support funding at national level. So, where is transparency and anti-corruption measures in this mechanism? Implementer is chosen through a tender procedure by the international actor. Where do we have cost, time, and resource efficiency? How is it ensured? Implementer is paid only for working hours, because services are subject of contract, not goods. And existing tools, models, and patterns are taken as a backbone for work that ensures time efficiency. At the same time, the workload is distributed between different stakeholders that also make it time, resource, and cost efficient. And of course, mentorship clause ensures long-lasting effect and efficiency of resources, because you don't have to pay for project team, but the renewability of efforts and continuity of work is ensured by availability of these clauses in the mechanism. So whenever we speak about implementer that is selected, appointed by the international actor, that is stakeholder working at national level, they may be of two level, individual level or organization level. And of course, both levels of implementers have their advantages. So it depends also on the initiative itself, because sometimes some reform initiative may be risky in terms of validation of results and afterwards launching the results into practice. In this case, organization would be good. Why? Because organization have institution anchoring, and social media websites and platforms might be used as additional safeguard, right, for validating results afterwards. Concerning individual level, it is very good when opinion molders are engaged if the reform initiative aims better advocacy or ambassadors, or if simply the reform initiative is not that huge, there is just certain amount of actions to be done for the implementation, like following the instructions, for example, to filling in some platform with data, then individual level will be enough. It was the case with open FDG platform in Ukraine, for example. The UK Statistics Office, together with the US government and Code organization, developed an open SDG platform, ready-to-use tool for all the countries that was widely used. And in Ukraine, it was supported by UNDP. They put it into the bigger project of the UN system because the initiative was that praised that it didn't need any additional anchoring, because it was like safeguarded 100% that it would be used and it will become popular. So that's why just individual consultant was hired to help to tune that platform and put it on the governmental domain. Implementation phase. This was all, now I want to emphasize, this was all about the initiation. Because in my theory, initiation is the main phase. And if everything is done properly at the phase of initiation, then at the phase of implementation, stakeholders simply have to do their job. Public agency coordinate and endorse, international actor pay for services of implementers, and relevantly experts, representatives of academia, or those persons, individual persons, or organizations that are engaged into the implementation, just implement and mentor. Validation. Validation happens through public events, and the main stakeholders at this phase are people, users of the reform initiative, government, and opponents. And it is crucially important to making them feel party to the process and to make the results public on institutional channels. Why stakeholder partnership philosophy is good? On the one hand, the stakeholder partnership foresees that there shall be consensus oriented decision-making process. And this is the case, but concerning the organization of work around the implementation of the reform initiative, wherever the gist and the content of the reform initiative itself is the prerogative of the public agency. Stakeholder partnership form ensures the viability of reform initiative, because this is the product of all stakeholders' work. This means that, for example, if for the sake of viability of reform initiative, the public agency declines at certain stage to validate the results or to place the results on its institution channels, other stakeholders will do it, of course, because they are also the authors and they have this right of intellectual property authorship over the reform initiative. So, model of stakeholder partnership in public administration foresees that initiation is the most important phase of reform initiative implementation. That transformation anchors play inspiring role. Because many of you maybe know how it was misinterpreted by Russian propaganda whenever they were distorted the notion of external governance. That means, for example, mostly functional cooperation whenever the researchers speak about the European Union and its policy. But still, in this theory, I decided to introduce and to offer for the use formalized inspiration and inspiring role of transformation anchors. Then all stakeholders are put on board the process of initiation and roles distributed, although they may be operable at different phases or stages, but their role is prescribed and determined at the very beginning. Multi-level engagement and win-win approach, database of ready-to-use tools and patterns, plus adding country ownership. And this is another question for presentation, how that country ownership process shall take place. Decentralization of reform initiatives with the leading role of public agency and close cooperation of academia and practitioners. So the advantages of the use of these models for transnational cooperation and for the implementation of reforms is that the model foresees cost, time, and resource efficiency. Why? Because it has inbuilt mechanism of ready-to-use tools, application of distribution of burden of work between all stakeholders, and much work is done by the public agency. Universality and multidisciplinary nature, it may be applied from micro to macro level initiatives. Why? Because reform as a system is split into reform initiatives that are joined under themes into the portfolio. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, if any.
Thank you for your presentation. Do we have any questions? Yes, please, Professor Gawlowski.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Thank you for an interesting presentation about this stakeholder partnership theory. I'd like to ask if you think about implementing policy transfer approach to your model, because I think that might be useful to cross this approaches, because I think it's very similar in terms of transforming or transplanting institutions from one institutional setting to the other.
Thank you, Professor Gawlowski. That's exactly just a week ago we had a roundtable with the colleagues from political science where we were discussing that how reforms are tied, I mean, in the context of public administration and political science, and how they may be used or misused for pursuing democratization or vice versa autocratization, and what is consolidation of autocracy and exactly what is used. So my theory, stakeholder partnership philosophy, has inbuilt democratization mechanism. So this is how the policy transfer is happening. Because whenever we speak about the correlation, how transnational reforms correlate or are interlinked with national reforms, and how the work, how the models are, for example, developed, how working groups operate, this very availability, this very presence of adding country ownership, not only taking the model, like mirroring the model, but it is always adaptation together with adding to it.
Okay, thank you for that. Cross my fingers
Thank you,
for your
thank you.
success.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your answer. So I see that the next presenter is already connected with us. I would like to introduce Pavlo Kononenko from Kiev, Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev. And if you are ready, you can start your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for invitation. I would like to start my presentation about referendum as a special form of implementation of people's government in the state of the basis of democracy. As everybody knows, democracy as a social phenomenon has gone through a difficult and long path of centuries-long development. Historically, democracy has many types, forms, features of manifestation. This is how public, tribal, antique, bourgeois, post-industrial, and other forms are distinguished. Sorry, I forgot to share my presentation. Democracy is a form of society organization and state political system which is based on the people as the source of power, the consistent implementation of principle of equality and freedom, people's real participation in the affairs state and society management. Democracy requires people, power belongs entirely to people. Direct democracy is a method of direct expression of the will of the people. Direct democracy has an imperative and legitimate character, can solve public issues. The main forms of direct democracy are elections, referendums, people initiatives, meetings, rallies, marches, demonstrations, citizens' appeals, citizens' advisory surveys, public opinion identification, public discussions, etc.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you please share your slides because we cannot see them still, okay?
Oh, sorry. 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 I'm very sorry, but I have a technical problem to share my slides.
Would you like me to open your slides from here?
Yes, if it's possible, it would be very helpful.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, so now we have your slides open, so please tell me next slide, okay, when you want me to switch the slides, or you cannot see them at all. Can you see your slides from?
Yes.
No? Yes. Okay.
Not yet. Not yet. I haven't seen them, not yet. Ah, yes. I can see.
Okay. So just tell me next slide when you need me to switch to the next slide. Okay.
I think we need previous slides. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, please continue.
A referendum is a vote of the population of the entire state, national referendum, or a certain part of its population, local referendum, with the aim to solve the most important state and social life issues. Referendums and elections have a common method of implementation, voting, but they are different in their subject matter. Elections are held to determine the person who will receive additional powers. The task of referendum is to resolve important public issues. The purpose of referendum can be approval, change, or repeal of laws with additional public interest. In scientific literature and in legislative practice, the term plebiscite is sometimes used alongside the term referendum. There are different types of referendums. According to the legal force of the decision-making, referendum can be imperative or consultative. The decision adopted by the mandatory referendum has a higher universally binding, specific, and final meaning and doesn't require any approval. We have one imperative referendum in Ukrainian history set up on December the 1st in 1991. During this referendum, it was determined whether or not Ukraine be an independent state. The consultative referendum is conducted with the aim of identifying the voters' position on issue, the decision of which is left to the body of state power or the body of local self-governments. The results of the consultative referendum have no legal force. Its purpose is to establish the opinion of voters on certain issues. This opinion can be taken into account, but is not mandatory when solving the relevant problem by state bodies. In a number of countries, the consultative referendum is carried out under the name of national discussion. Next type of the referendum. According to the formula of referendum, a referendum can have consultative nature, legislative nature, international legislation nature, or administrative nature. A consultational referendum is a result of which a constitutional referendum is referendum on issue to change, adopt, or reject changes into the main law or state constitution. If the aim of referendum is to change national legislation, it is the next type, legislation referendum. And if the purpose of referendum is to adopt or change the act of international legislation, referendum has international legislation nature. If the topic of referendum is to change, for example, administrative borders of region, referendum has administrative nature. Next type of referendum. According to the timing, referendum can be pre-parliamentary, post-parliamentary, and extra-parliamentary. Pre-parliamentary type of referendum held before the adoption of the law by the parliament in order to find out the opinion of voter on this issue. Post-parliamentary type of referendum conducted after the adoption of the law by the parliament for the purpose of its approval. And extra-parliamentary type of referendum is conducted when the law is adopted in a referendum by passing the parliament. Yes, thank you. Next type of referendum. According to the initiator, referendum can be state authority initiative, local self-government initiative, or petition referendum. The main difference is who is initiator. If the referendum is initiated by state authority or local self-government authority, or is initiated at the request of citizens. Next slide, please. Thank you. According to the decision nature, referendum can be approving or ratifying and canceling. When the referendum is approving, through a referendum, voters approve the decision of the parliament or local self-government body. When the referendum is canceling, voters are invited to cancel an act of the parliament or local self-government body that has already entered into force. Interesting tip about Ukrainian history. Due to the constitution, the national referendum in Ukraine can be called by the parliament or the president of Ukraine. The parliament is authorized to appoint a referendum to resolve issues of changing the territory of the state, and the president may announce a referendum on popular initiative or announce a referendum as initiator itself. The next slide is about types of questions. According to the type of questions, there are two types of referendums. First, when the question in referendum have unequivocal answer, yes or no. And the next type is when a question is with two or more answer options. and the voter can choose only one answer or reject all answers. Sorry. Next part of my presentation is about conclusions. To conclude, a referendum is an important and efficient form of people's government implementation in democratic state. Some European countries use referendum as a method of asking a method of national discussion very wide. Some countries, for example, Ukraine, use referendum not so wide, just several times during our history. So, but at the same time, referendum still be a very important part and important method of direct democracy. Thank you for your attention. I am open to your questions.
So do we have any questions for the presenter? No? Okay, thank you for your presentation, for connecting with us, and we wish you the best. So let me check if we have any questions for the presenters. No, there are no questions. Maybe Professor have a question? No? Okay. So thank you all for attending this section, this panel of our conference. I wish you all the best and thank you for taking the participation in this panel.